need it already.
You guys are good sports. Especially Dan. Dan, you earned your keep. You get extra dessert today. Right? Well, we all have our gifts. It's warm. I got warm from that, don't you? Forgive me. Forgive my appearance. Yeah, well, and I thought about that. After I put that blanket on, I was like, well, you know, good guys. It's an odd story. It's an odd story to start with. In fact, as biblical stories go, this is perhaps the most odd. We have flying chariots. We have people coming back to life. We have armies. We have defeats of armies. We have all sorts of strange things going on in the Bible. And I would be willing to bet that many of you perhaps have never even heard this story before. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's an obscure story. It's found in the 22nd chapter of Numbers, 22nd and 23rd chapter of Numbers. Very obscure Old Testament story. And likely the reason we haven't heard it before, many of you haven't, is because what would you ever do with the story of a talking donkey? Right? It's great for kids. I mean, that's gold for kids. But as adults, what do we do with it? Particularly when we're taught the story as kids, and then you think back on it, well, I was taught this, and boy, I don't know. And stories of flying chariots with Elijah. Remember how Elijah went up in the heaven on a flying chariot? What do you do with those stories, particularly as you're adult? And furthermore, and even more to the point, why would you ever start a new church with a story like that? Yeah, right? You're gonna find out. You're gonna find out. The truth is, I chose that one deliberately because there perhaps is no more obscure story in the Bible. In fact, in many stories that we read in the Bible, oftentimes the presence of an angel is a little bit too much for some people. But ironically, in this story, the angel, the sort of fantasticness of this, and whether you believe in angels or not isn't the point. That's up to you. That's between you and God. But I'm simply saying that for some people that raises a red flag. But you almost missed the angel because you've got a talking donkey. And what's even more interesting, and we almost forget about the point that we've got Balaam, who supposedly has this gift to say a curse. Basically, he was called by the Moabite king to go and curse the Israelite army so that they would fall. Because it was thought that if this prophet, Balaam was thought to have such power, that if he said a curse, that the gods would follow what he said to do. That's why the king was calling him to give this curse. So this is another thing that raises our flags. We don't necessarily believe that one person has the power to curse an entire army, although it's not far off. We're not far off. When American armies, for instance, or any armies of the world, and it still happens today, believe that we can incur the gods, that God is on our side and we will win. It's not far off, all right? But still that thinking raises red flags. We think, boy, you know, that somebody can give a curse and the gods will simply follow in line. So that's the third thing. We've got a talking donkey, we've got an angel, and we've got this notion that a man can curse an entire army and that the gods will do as he says. And what's even more interesting, and this was even news to me, as I was doing my preparation for this week, in the 23rd chapter of Numbers, the very next chapter, still part of the story, in the 22nd verse, the Moabite king is so overwhelmed by the Israelite army that he uses the reference. He says, they are as strong as a unicorn. And when I did a little more research, there are many references in the Bible to unicorns. It was seen as a sign of strength. Okay. So we've got this story that has four things that are incredibly difficult to even consider. And normally we would never hear this preached on, because what are you going to do? I'm sitting here in the pew and I'm hearing stories of unicorns, talking donkeys, men who can curse armies, and the like. What do you do with that? I deliberately chose the most fantastic, and I mean fantastic biblical story I could think of for a reason. Actually, a number of reasons. A, it's good for kids. But B, this. I am of the very strong belief. In fact, it is my whole belief that even though you have these stories where the facts may be questionable, dubious, where some people may say, oh, that's nonsense. Some people choose to believe it, that's fine. But where you've got these stories, most people will reject them because the facts seem dubious. And what I am here to say, and what I absolutely believe with every fiber of my being, that whether or not the facts are true, the story still carries powerful truths about life. I don't believe that the Bible is worthless, is no good, that, oh, all these crazy stories are, oh, we don't need the Bible. I believe it's very powerful. But it just needs to be looked at differently. What you choose to do with the facts of this story is up to you. But there are truths, deep and powerful truths within this story. Not the least of which is this notion of voice. Okay, so take the facts. Whatever you choose to believe about the facts of this story, and we'll put those right over here. Those are the facts. Let's find the truth in this story. And I said we were talking about this notion of voice. One of the themes we see going on throughout this entire story, in fact, the theme of the entire story, is this notion that Balaam's voice has power. So powerful that he's being paid to come in and simply speak. Now, who would ever pay someone just to come in and speak? Oh, wait a minute. But the notion of a man's voice having power, or a woman's voice, or a person's voice having power is the driver of this whole story. The Moabite king thinks he's going to get slaughtered, and he's bringing this man's voice. Well, then we hear of the Moabite king's voice. He issues a decree, and by his authority he sends the princes to go get Balaam. So that's another voice. Then we have the voice of the princes imploring Balaam. Then we have the voice of Balaam gets on it, and the voice of the donkey speaking to Balaam. Then we have the voice of the angel saying, "What, you've done that." The agreement was this. The princes had come the first time. Balaam says, "No way, I'm not going to do it. God doesn't want me to bless or curse your army, curse the Israelite army." Sends them back. They come with even more money. Balaam says, "Listen, we'll sleep on it." And in the night, God says to Balaam, God says, "Listen, wake up in the morning, and here's the trigger. If the princes come and ask you to go with them, then you can go. If they don't ask you to go with them, you can't go, and I don't want you to do this." And the Bible says that Balaam woke up in the morning and went. Makes no mention of the princes coming to get him, as their agreement had been. So, Balaam was violating the agreement with God. That's why the donkey stopped them. That's why the angel said, "You're violating God's will." But then the angel goes on to say, "Listen, you're violating God's will, but I'm going to let you go anyway. All right? Just only do what God is telling you to do. All right? Don't make it up as you go along here. Do what God is telling you to do in your conversation with God." So we've got the voice of the angel. And then we've got, later on in the story, we see that that Balaam goes out there and he looks at the army. Once, twice, three times. He's asked to curse the army. Once, twice, three times. He offers God's blessing on the Israelite army. So we see the voice of Balaam again, and we see the voice of God again. Okay? So there are many voices going on here, but this notion of voice. In this story, fundamentally, there are three operative voices that I want you to think about and focus on. Okay? First of all is the voice of Balaam. The notion, whether or not you believe he has supernatural powers or anything, that wasn't even it. The notion that a human voice has power. I don't mean just the power to be loud or the power to tell things what to do, but when we speak with passion, when we speak with our belief, when we speak with who we are, our voice carries power. It has the potential to make a difference. It has the potential to change lives. That's the metaphor of Balaam's voice. Whether or not you believed he was going to curse a whole army, that's not the point. The point is that his voice, this man had a power about him. The second operative voice is the voice of the donkey. Whether or not you believe it actually happened isn't the point. It's a metaphor. The metaphor is that Balaam is going this direction. He thought he was going to go this direction. But God's will was something entirely different. And the donkey stops him. The angel and the donkey stop him 3 times. And the donkey turns around and says, "You're not doing what's right. Why are you hitting me? I've been faithful. You're going the wrong direction." Now in Latin, the word for a donkey is equus asinus. Equus horse, asinus is the actual name for a donkey. It's the type of horse that it is. Right? And so we have this voice of this donkey, this ass, or a female donkey is called a jenny ass, male donkey is called a jackass in the actual Latin terms and in the English. So we actually have a jackass turning around and telling Balaam, the supposedly knowledgeable person, what to do. Yeah, what a loss. I know what a loss. So the second point is this. A, we have the human voice, we have Balaam's voice, but then we also have the voice of the jackass. And I don't mean an animal. I mean that oftentimes in life, it is the fool. It is the person that really has no credibility, the flawed human being, the dolt, the normal person, the person who has no great gifts, who often speaks the truth, who often bears wisdom, who often turns our path. Come on, sweetheart. It's okay. Who turns our path, who gets us back onto God's path. That's the metaphor there, that the voice of the donkey was the operative voice to turn Balaam's path. You've heard me say it before.